Okay, so we're going to now look at Act 5 scenes. Well, two briefly, and then most of the beginning of Scene 3 for King Lear for the AQA English Literature A-level paper, which is a tragedy focused paper. So this sequence, mostly what we're going to look at is the end of the battle with Edmund at his moment of triumph as he leads Lear and Cordelia in, and he seems like everything's gone his way, that he's achieved his aims really, and then he plots to get rid of Lear and Cordelia, and we'll see Lear and Cordelia's final exchange in the play, where there's some strange sort of hope that they're going to live together in prison. So locating the passage obviously is the conclusion of the play, and it's the height of the disaster, but it also comes after the brief battle sequence, which has a couple of key lines and reminds us that Edgar is going to return, and that Edmund's moment of triumph is going to be questioned in this final sequence. So, just looking quickly then at Act 5, Scene 2, Edgar brings Gloucester in and says, just wait there, I'm going to go and join in the battle. And then, well, how do we do this on stage? We don't want it to be too quick, because then that will look a bit ridiculous that he rushes straight back in and says, oh, it's all lost. But then on the other hand, the audience doesn't really want to sit around being bored with a few flashing lights and people marching up and down and a bit of noise of swords clashing. So it's a difficult sequence in some ways, but it has to be there, and we have to know that the battle is lost. We know in Shakespeare's time it wasn't really possible to put convincing battle sequences on stage, so he never does. He always conveys them in this way. The key bit, though, is Edgar returns and says all is lost, and Gloucester goes back into that depression, which he's been in and out of throughout the last two acts, and he says, no farther, as in, I won't go any further, sir. A man may rot even here, I'll just lie here and die. And Edgar gives one last chance to try and cheer him up. He says, what, in ill thoughts again? Man must endure their going hence, even as they're coming hither. Ripeness is all, come on. So you've got to put up with things. You've got to put up with the bad times as well as the good. I mean, it's a very optimistic, in a way, philosophy for one who's had a pretty rotten deal of things himself. Ripeness is all. Just be ready for things. Just do things at the right time. Is a optimistic philosophy, but I mean, again, it's questionable whether it's borne out by the horrors of the play. However, what I love is Gloucester's response, and that's true too, which may well be the kind of exhausted response of the audience at this point, as we're coming near the end of the play, about how much wisdom and how many thoughts, how many paradoxes and how many complicated thoughts we've had to kind of put up with in the play, and we've been bombarded. So we just feel like, we can't take another bit of clever information, another wise and witty saying, or another thought-provoking saying. It's just like, oh, that's true too. There's so many other things that we've heard that are true throughout this play. We don't know how to take it all in. However, that's just a prelude to the next scene. And what we see here in the first 40 lines of the final scene, this long final scene with three main sections really, which we're going to look at separately. We look at the first 40 lines. Edmund in charge, Cordelia and Lear together for this final time. In fact, it's the last time we'll see Cordelia at all. So Edmund begins the scene, of course, and he's giving out orders. So there's a sense here of Edmund at his most powerful and most confident, where the other players in the battle is not clear at this point. He seems to be the one who's led it and is now in charge and taking charge. So he says, take these off to be guarded. And it's Cordelia then who has some comforting words. We're not the first who with best meaning have incurred the worst. There's some rhyme here, interestingly, isn't the first and worst and then frown and down, although the first line's quite short, so it's a slightly odd rhyming sequence. I'm cast down for you, oppressed king, very humble. myself could else frown out for false fortunes frown. A lot of F's there for her to cope with. I'm not sure why Shakespeare's thrown all those in. Perhaps a sort of whispered sense or a sense of bitterness. I don't know. But she says that I could put up with this if it wasn't for you. So there's this kind of giving forth of her heart, which is what Cordelia ultimately represents. A sort of honest and truthful, loving selfhood that puts others before her, which, pretty much Lear and all the other big characters in the play have been unable to do, but only really her and Kent and the Fool have ever shown that capacity consistently. And Lear has started to learn it at points. But it's that idea of, I'm more concerned for you than I am for me, which is what makes human life endurable, really, that we kind of show compassion for each other. Now, Lear's response is hopeful in the sense that he, not only does he have a slightly weird hope that they could live a happy life, but the hope is more that he actually tries to cheer Cordelia up. He shows loving concern for her, so he echoes her compassion, which is the Lear that we've seen glimpses of elsewhere in the play. And now we see it perhaps as his final state, which is quite encouraging in a way. There's this sense of, does Lear ever improve? Does he ever learn anything? Does he ever get out of his madness? Well, because this is slightly crazy what he says, but I don't think he's fully crazy. It's sort of a dad cheering up his daughter, really, which is a very sweet and loving thing. We'll away to prison. We'll sing like birds in the cage. All that animal imagery was often very fierce and angry and bitter in the play. Here it's quite cheerful, even though it's birds in a cage, it's still singing birds. When you ask for blessing, I'll kneel down and ask thee for forgiveness. So, there's a kind of, we'll echo each other's compassion and concern and love for each other. It's a bit more equal. We'll pray and sing and tell sad tales and laugh at gilded butterflies. There's that sense of the people, and he mentions it again, of the people in the court, the successful, the wealthy people. We'll laugh at them. We're not bothered by them. We don't need all that. Which is what he's had to learn again. He sort of gave up his kingship at the start, but didn't give up, or didn't want to give up, all the kind of luxury of being a king. But now he realises all that luxury is rubbish. Talk of court news, and we'll talk with them too, who loses, who wins, who's in and outs. And so, we'll talk about what's going on in the court, but we won't be bothered. We don't care. So there's this sort of image of being, ready to escape the world and not really care about the world. It doesn't matter. Finally, what matters is their love for each other, and everything else can just fade away. It's a rather beautiful thought. As if we were God's spies, the great pacts and sects of great ones that ebb and flow by the moon, we'll wear them out, we'll outlast them all while they're fighting for position, which we saw in the beginning of this act, if you remember, positioning the scene a bit more. Act 5, Scene 1 was Gonal and Regan fighting each other. So, there's an image there of what happens amongst the powerful, that all they do is fight each other. So there's a sort of beautiful, tender moment there between the two of them, and it has to be really played for some power and some energy. I think it has to be focused on. But then Edmund just cuts away with, take them away, just 3 words. He's in charge, get rid of them, they're trash to him. And then the last speech that Lear has before the concluding howling, which is when all he does is just mourn his daughter's death, is, upon such sacrifices, the gods themselves throw incense. Which is very, you might say it's the arrogance coming back of, this is so important, what's happening to us, that gods would throw incense on it, gods would bless this moment. But you might also say that it's an awareness that the gods ought to really do more and ought to acknowledge what's happening to human beings. If there are gods, why have they been so absent from this play? And I love that line, have I caught thee? which might mean that what she starts to cry maybe, and then he says, "Have I got to you?" But or do I make myself understood? It could mean, but it also means, have I got you here? Have I found you again? Have I got you to love? Are we together finally? So there's so much in that little line there, isn't there? A little half line. He that parts us shall bring a brand from heaven, and fire is hence like foxes. One final bit of animal imagery from Lear there. You'll have to do quite a lot to part us, but of course that's exactly what happens. That, as we'll see in the next moment, this cynical guy who works for Edmund is going to kill Cordelia. Wipe thine eyes, the good years shall devour them. Before they'll make us weep, we'll starve and first come. So he said that before when Goneril was arguing with him. Oh, you think I'll weep, I'll not weep. But here, it's more tender because it's about Cordelia, and it's again a father saying to a child, "Don't cry, it's all right. Everything's going to be fine." Perhaps knowing that it's not as well. The way that parents do for children. To try and cheer you up in the bleakest of times. So I think it's beautiful and sweet, but it can kind of get lost amongst the kind of rush of everything that's happening. Plus, this has been a long play, and one of the problems if you go see a Shakespeare play is they're long, and the endings can sometimes feel very drawn out, and there's a bit of impatience now, even in the most avid follower of Shakespeare. There's a bit of sense of, God, how much more of this have we got to go through? And there's still a lot to happen in this scene. This scene covers an awful lot of action. It is quite an action-based conclusion, actually. Some of the conclusions to Shakespeare plays are just kind of going back over what's gone on and saying, oh, and then this is that, and now that's that, oh, now I understand. And that can be rather tedious, particularly for a modern audience used to the snappier sort of film and TV style. But even so, you've got to kind of make us want to still linger with this. You've got to make this moment beautiful and tender, I think. And then contrast it with the harshness of the final bit that we're going to look at in this video, which is Edmund then calls this captain. Lear and Cordelia are led off, and Edmund calls this captain, gives him a piece of paper. He says, "Go follow them to prison. One step I have advanced thee. If thou dost as this instructs thee, thou makest thy way to noble fortune." So Edmund knows. He spotted somebody, presumably he thinks he knows what they're like. He knows that he can get this guy to do terrible things because there's advantage in it. Men are as the time is, which was interesting what Albany was saying at the end of 5-1, that I've got to do what the time needs me to do, which was to fight the French in that case. Here it's like the time is evil and horrible, so you've got to be evil and horrible. So a little sort of invitation into his world there from Edmund, saying that's how things are. The world's horrible, the world's bleak, we've got to behave badly too. It's Machiavellian, that term we've used a bit in the early videos looking at Edmund in particular. And the captain just, does he have any wrestle? Do we have a moment even for this very sort of unimportant character really? He's only got a couple of lines in the play. I'll do it, my lord. He decides, he thinks, and he thinks, yep, I'll do it. So off you go, says Edmund, giving his orders out, still in charge, last moments of him being in charge. It's funny the captain gets another line there. Shakespeare's sort of known for this. He finds a minor character and then can't help but just give him a little bit of life, He doesn't just use him as a functional character. There's a gentleman in this play that is purely functional. But even here, this captain, who could be another gentleman, or the opposite of a gentleman, has this line, I cannot draw a cart nor eat dried oats. If it be man's work, I'll do it. What does he mean? I'm not an animal. With man's work, does he mean sort of toxic masculinity, the brutality, the horror of a violent man, a real man does violent things. I'm not a horse though, so there's a bit of pride there, I think, isn't there? Saying, I'm not doing this because I can be ordered around. I'm not doing this because I'm a dumb animal that just does what I'm told. I'm doing it because I believe in it, because I'm a real man. I want to prove my manhood. So don't think you've just cynically won me there. I'm doing it for a good reason. Now, this may be over egging a character who's got, literally 3 lines in the play, but it's typical of Shakespeare to inscribe upon some minor moments some interesting thoughts there as to what makes somebody do these things. And this comes back throughout history. Shakespeare is so aware of what human beings are like that, we'll see elements of this in, the Nazi behavior during the middle of the 20th century, when this big question was, why did they do these things? Why did fairly ordinary people join in with this horrific mistreatment of others? But we'll see it now. There are conflicts around the world going on today in which people behave barbarically and do most terrible things. From leaders ordering people to go and murder and destroy and recklessly bomb places, to individual soldiers and combatants, doing the excessively violent and horrific things. Why do we do these things? Why do human beings do this? It's mostly men. You have to say that throughout history it's been men who've driven these acts of violence. And if it's be man's work, I'll do it, seems to be the slogan of these people, these violent, cruel, bitter people who will do anything to prove that they too are strong and tough and deserve respect. And that really is what the play's been kind of analysing. And although Edmund's had some glamour and some appeal, in the end, maybe Shakespeare's wanting us to turn against Edmund at the end here and say, you are like this captain. You are like him, but worse. You ought to know better, maybe. You're a bit more educated than him. But either way, you're just a brute, and you pretend you're better than an animal, but actually you do things worse than animals. Animals don't particularly kill for no good reason. They kill because they want to eat. So the play has continued its tragic trajectory relentlessly, and it's only going to get more brutal and bloody and horrific through the final scenes. Although many of the so-called bad characters are going to get their comeuppance, what we've just seen here is the last moment of Cordelia's life on stage, and so things are not going to get better entirely.